Hey YouTubers, this is Nurse J, Nursing the Truth, and I hope everyone is having a great evening. This is my second video of the day, and you need to go back and watch Was Jesus in the Shadows of John the Baptist? And I am going to be reading you some things out of the book of The Masks of Christ by Lynn Pickett and Clive Prince. They are also the authors of the Templars Revelation. And I do have another book that they wrote called The Messiah Legacy, okay, which I've read all these. And they also have a book called The Holy Blood, Holy Grail. So, very thick books. So, as Nurse J does, she likes to bring you all kinds of information for you guys to think about, to put it through your head, to kind of see where and what you want to believe. Okay? Now, as I said, the Bible is an allegorical astrotheology, numerology book made and given to us by the Freemasons, Hermeticists, secret societies, but you never know. There could have been a renegade person, but they just attached this name onto this character, because there are a lot of people in the New Testament that were real people. So what you have to think about is they have to have characters to make it be a believable story. So let's dig in. The rival Christs. Now, who would these rival Christs be? Well, Christ or Christos or Christus basically means the good one, a good moral character, a Christ figure that was anointed with the crocodile oil from Egypt. And also, too, this oil, you have to be anointed as a king. Now, in the book, The Masks of Christ, they try to give you a historical perspective of who these people are, and digging through old manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, so on and so forth. So these rival Christs. Now, as we know, quote unquote, John the Baptist baptizes Jesus into his initiation, his rite, and for him to spread what he feels is necessary for the area and or nation. Now, the early Christian community was uncomfortable about the relationship between Jesus and the Baptist. This author says that for the gospel writers, it was a source of both joy and embarrassment. While Walter Wink poses a far-reaching question at the beginning of his classic study, why did Jesus lavish on John's words of such high praise that the church would later find them a source of profound embarrassment? Even the pages of the New Testament make abundantly clear the evidence reveals that at least during the early Galilee phase, Jesus was not only considered by others as John's successors, but that is how he portrayed himself to the people. Whatever the background to Jesus' new role, the relationship between the two men seems to have suffered a major breakdown. Although churchgoers are still routinely kept in ignorance of the fact, but almost unbelievably, there it is in the Gospels, while languishing in Herod's jail John sends a message to Jesus expressing doubts about his disciples' activities. Originally from the Quell source, the astounding passage is found in Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark or John. Now, remember when I told you earlier, it is in the Gospels, this menagerie of problems and issues, because you'll read one gospel and you're all right with it. But then when you read the other one, you're scratching your head going, but this says that. So how can this be? There seems like there's a little schism in the discipleship. And you know, for years, I never caught on to it, but as I became aware, the wool was pulled over my eyes, then I saw. And everything looked more clear that there is a problem. What is going on? And you start to dig and dig until you find the answers. And thank goodness there's people that wrote books that is helping us get to the place where we need to be. Now, this is what it says in Matthew. When John heard in prison that the Messiah was what he was doing, John sent his disciples to ask him, Jesus, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? What is this? Okay, so the church automatically gets the preachers to say, oh, well, here it is. John the Baptist is waiting on Jesus the Messiah because he knows, because he has the prophetic ear, that Jesus is the Son of God and God in the flesh, that he must baptize him to be a mortal and go through all of the things that a mortal man goes through, and that he's going to be the Savior of the world, and the little dove is going to descend on the head. But then the other scriptures say he didn't know who he was. Now think about this. If you are supposed to be cousins to this man, then you should know what your cuz looks like. Because, you know, I mean, I have plenty of cousins that I haven't seen in a long time. But I can recognize them, right? Especially if you've grown up with them, right? But basically this Jesus and John, this analogy where they're getting the 6 months thing is, Jesus is the sun, John is the underworld. They're 6 months apart, as above so below. You know, the sun shines, it lays down, it's a tomb, and then it comes up in the vernal equinox. That's how they get the 6 months, people. They had to get a real character man to put this God man to us. But it's not. So, John knows, or he says, are you the one to come? Now, if God has already told you that's the man, then you shouldn't question. This is what it is. You shouldn't have any doubts because God said. What are you reading, Christians? What are you taking in your brain from these preachers? And these preachers are going to lie to you and stare you in the face and go, give me your 10%. And Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised. And the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Now, the authors say, could a question really come from the same man who had so recently groveled at Jesus' feet, proclaiming him to be the Lamb of God? And that is what I just said, and I didn't read it. The absence of a further response by John merely indicates what parties on both sides knew to be fact, that John did not accept Jesus as the coming one. Bingo. On purely logical grounds, the story can hardly be a later fabrication simply because it contradicts what the early Christians believed. Now, the implications are truly seismic, the authors say. For some tantalizing, unknown reason, John the Baptist began to doubt Jesus and was worried enough while in prison to send a delegation to convey his concerns directly to him. Significantly, we do not learn John's response to Jesus' reply, but had it mollified him, we would certainly have been told. As it is, apparently John went to his death still doubting Jesus. And that's sad. The episode also implies that he even thought, or even though Jesus had his own following, John still considered himself to be in charge. Why else would he feel he had the authority to question him? So, as we have no clear idea what exactly John expected of Jesus, it is impossible to be sure what caused his doubts. Had he accepted and endorsed Jesus as the coming one, but now because of his protege's interpretation of the role, changed his mind? Or perhaps he had never proclaimed Jesus at all and refused to accept him now that he had a reputation and following in his own right. Now, Jesus' apparent non-sequitur implies that healing, exercising, and proclaiming the good news to the poor are not what John expected of him. His reply is actually a reference to a passage in the book of Isaiah about God's coming judgment. However, much more relevantly, these parts of Isaiah had been blended into a prophecy of the Messiah. And the Dead Sea Scroll text, known as the Messianic Apocalypse, had modified one line to read, "He will heal the wounded, resurrect the dead, proclaim glad tidings to the poor." The crucial change was the addition of reviving the dead as a sign of the Messiah, which is not in Isaiah. So, the raising of the dead is not in the book of Isaiah, but it was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the only text beside the Gospels where Isaiah has been changed in this way, and therefore there must be a connection. If Jesus was consciously using the modified version, then his reply to John the Baptist is effectively a declaration of messiahship. So, evidently, these people knew what the Isaiah messianic star prophecy was supposed to be. This was written hundreds of years prior to the first century. So you had all kinds of messiahs running around. The kingship, to be a king, not someone to die and resurrect from the dead in 3 days. That's not their prophecy. Their prophecy was supposed to be someone that would reign in Israel over the people. That's what their prophecy was. Now, although the Baptist question from his cell comes from Q, and appears only in Matthew and Luke. The other two Gospels are by no means silent on the tensions between Jesus and John the Baptist. In Mark's Jesus disputes with the unlikely combination of disciples of the Pharisees and the Baptist. Although the reference to Pharisees must be a later addition, as they never had disciples. Scholars consider it much more likely that the passage originally referred solely to a dispute about the practices ordained by Jesus and John. Christians who were locked in an ongoing dispute with the Pharisees, and it obscured the fact that Jesus and John the Baptist disagreed about certain fundamental practices. And as I said in my video earlier, it said, for example, John's disciples complained that Jesus' followers never had to undergo the rigors of fasting as they did. Wow. So if you were a disciple of a master rabbi and you were taught to do the things that he did, but then you decided you didn't like the way that was going and you wanted to do things your way, then you broke off and you started your own deal. Wow. Isn't that something, how people can just follow people and take whatever they want? Like today in all the churches. And also it says here that the average Jew was not usually required to fast regularly. The Pharisees fasted twice a week. While it is implied here that the Baptist's disciples followed a similar practice, the important point is that it would have been odd to single out Jesus' disciples for criticism on this point unless they were considered to be members of a sect that should do it. You know, it seems that Jesus was having a hard time to free himself from his famous mentor's shadow while at the same time relying on his connection with him to win people over. A similar situation occurs in the fourth gospel, where what was originally a reference to differences between Jesus and John has been disguised by another early change. Wow, and this is what I read to you earlier. Remember? There was an argument between John's disciples and a Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing, and they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, that man. See, the writers of the gospel doesn't want to say Jesus, it's that man. That man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan. The one you testified about. Look, he is baptizing and everyone is going to him. What in the hell is this? This is the kind of thing that opens a can of worms. And this passage has been long gone recognized as completely nonsensical. Why should John's disciples' debate with a Jew prompt them to ask their leader about his relative popularity with Jesus? And what connection does a dispute over ceremonial washing have with Jesus' baptizing? As far back as the 18th century, it was suggested that the word Jew, J-E-W, originally read Jesus, I-E-S-O-U-N. An idea is still favored by many modern specialists in the fourth gospel. And the issue had nothing to do with ceremonial washing. It was clearly about baptism. Exchange Jew for Jesus and ceremonial washing for baptism, and the passage makes complete sense. It must have been changed because later Christians were uncomfortable with the idea that Jesus and John seriously disagreed at a very personal level. Now, these examples highlighted the paradoxical position that the gospel writers in the early church took about John the Baptist. They had to downplay his importance in his own right and the extent of his influence over Jesus, but at the same time had to marginalize any suggestion of personal disagreement or rift between the two. In terms of their message, the authors needed Jesus and John to be one on the same for certain purposes, while for other agendas, ensuring that their man appeared unequivocally far superior to John. This, we believe, reflects Jesus' own dilemma. He owed his own reputation to his association with the Baptist, but also wanted to be seen as independent and uniquely glorious. Now, the Gospels themselves contain evidence that Jesus was considered as John's successor and took pains to portray himself as such, and this is even the subtext of the passage in which he contrasts his chosen lifestyle with his former master's lifestyle. Now, this is what they said. For John came neither eating nor drinking. You see, John the Baptist fasted, and he did not put any liquor or wine to his mouth. And they say to Jesus, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Apart from the fascinating hint about Jesus' reputation for self-indulgence, again, he is depicting himself as John's successor. He is implying that just because he lives a different and less ascetic lifestyle from John, that does not mean he is not still essentially a representative of what his former master begun. And again, it shows that the people continue to see him in terms of his association with John. Now, another episode in Mark, it says it happens late in Jesus' ministry, after John had been executed, and when Jesus is preaching to crowds in the Jerusalem temples, members of the Sanhedrin lay a trap by demanding that he disclose the source of his authority, wanting him to say publicly that he is the Messiah or other divinely appointed agent, and giving themselves the golden opportunity of denouncing him as subversive to the Romans. Jesus replies that he will answer them if they will answer him. John's baptism, he says, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. The reason for refusing to reply is very significant. They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin, they feared the people, for everyone held that John was really a prophet. And you know, that's what John said, remember, in the book of John, that this baptism only comes from heaven. The Holy Spirit, heaven, the inner Christ within. When you open your chakras. In other words, Jesus is using John's popularity, not his own, to threaten the Jerusalem's authority. That's kind of funny, you know. You got to go on someone else's coattail. That he should be doing this so late in his ministry shows that he is still, as far as the public is concerned, in John's shadows. But his words carry an even more significant implication. Once again, he is portraying himself as a Baptist successor. In Matthew and Luke, so again from Q, the Q source, once the Baptist's emissaries have been sent back to deliver Jesus' reply to his doubts in a reversal of the original situation, Jesus tells them what he thinks of John, effectively endorsing his former master. You see, in the scriptures, it does say that, that John the Baptist was supposed to baptize the coming one, the forerunner, the one that will do all these miraculous things and will save the sins of the people. Which we know that was not true. John the Baptist questioned this man. And it had nothing to do with dying and resurrecting on the third day. It only had to do with, are you going to overthrow Rome and be the king of Israel? This prophecy that they were looking for. Their forefathers had written this stuff. And they're still claiming this as today. And they're trying to make things go accordingly to plan with Rome, the Vatican, and the Zionists of Israel. So don't buy into the plan. And, John never said he was a prophet or Elias. But Jesus was saying to his disciples that Elias had reincarnated into John the Baptist as the prophet of the one to come. But John the Baptist said he was not a prophet and he was not Elias. So, dear truth seekers, I hope you have enjoyed this eye-open video. Please search your scriptures for truth. Precept upon precept, line upon line, half truths, half lies, more lies than truth. Hope you have a good evening. I'll bring you more truth here shortly. So stick around, my friends. Get you some hot chocolate, a warming blanket, and listen to Nurse J bring you more truth. From God Thoth, God Anubis, Goddess Bastet, we hope you have a wonderful evening. Hotep and Ashe.